Today I have some art gift ideas for you. I made 3 videos in different categories. One video is for artists, painters that already have some art supplies. The other video is more unusual and cool gift ideas that you might not think of when you think of artists and creative people, but they would really enjoy. I'll link those videos at the end if you want more art gift ideas. And today's video is for beginner artists. So I've put together 3 bundles of art supplies that a beginner artist would really love. For the first bundle, I've chosen acrylic painting. The reason I chose acrylic instead of oil painting is because oil is a lot more complicated for a beginner. It requires solvents that are toxic, harder to work with. Oil is harder to clean up. Acrylic is so beginner friendly. That's what I would recommend if you know someone that really wants to learn how to paint on canvas. The first thing you'll need is paint. So I recommend only the primary colors: blue, red, yellow. From there you can mix all the other colors, and you'll also need some black and white. I recommend getting the biggest tube of white that you can find because you use up a lot of white when painting. Acrylic paint can be expensive, so there's the professional quality, which are Golden and Liquitex. Those are my 2 favorites, but there's also student grade quality paint that is pretty good. I really like Basic, but there are other ones, PBO and other brands. I recommend that you go to an art supply store to buy acrylic paint and not go to like Walmart or the dollar store. It's really better to go to the art supply store. And if you want to save a little bit of money, and if it's a real beginner, maybe ask someone to direct you to the student grade quality paint, and that should be really good to start with. When it comes to brushes, I recommend only 2 or 3 brushes. So a large one to cover bigger areas and to blend, a mid one, and then a detailed, like tinier one. And when you go to the art supply store, you might be overwhelmed with brushes. You just go to the section that says acrylic paint brushes and you'll be good. Anything is good. Sometimes it comes in packages. There's a little bundle of brushes that could be a good option to save money. I don't recommend dollar store brushes because sometimes it's hit and miss, and sometimes they can lose their bristles. So it's better to have 3 pretty good brushes than 20 really bad ones. To mix the paint and dilute the paint, you'll need a paint palette. I have this one that's made of plastic, like a very slick plastic that's easily washable, very durable. I've had it for many years, so they sell those at the art supply store. It's a really good investment and it works really well. But there's also pads of disposable paint palettes, which is essentially a pad of wax paper that you can use, rip off, and throw away. Whatever you prefer, both works. You'll need to buy a surface to paint on. Most beginners, I feel, would prefer to paint on a canvas because it feels like legit, like you're a real painter if you paint on a canvas, which is really great. Sometimes they come in a bundle of multiple canvases for a good price. But there's also the option of painting on canvas paper. So it's a pad of paper that is really thick and has a texture as if it was canvas. So you get that feeling of canvas, but you get a whole bunch of paintings. Like you can get 20 in a pad and you can practice a lot, and it doesn't take up as much storage. It's a lot less expensive as well. So that's a good option. And the middle ground option is a canvas board, which is canvas but on a hard surface, which is less expensive than canvas. You can frame it as well. On a wall, it would look like a canvas, but it takes up less storage space and it's less expensive. If it was me receiving the gift, I would probably be happy with a canvas paper pad to have a whole bunch of options to practice on, and maybe one larger canvas so I could practice and then go bigger. And when receiving a gift, especially as a beginner, you want inspiration, you want to start painting, but often you don't know where to start. And as a beginner, I remember that having a first positive experience with painting is really key to want to keep going. When it feels complicated, it's hard to get back to it and keep at it. So I recommend including a little book that could be very inspiring for a beginner in the bundle that you give as a gift. You can also recommend my channel. Of course, I have tons of tips on acrylic painting, but I feel like a book is really inspiring and you can start painting from the first day you get your gift. In this bundle, I'm recommending 2 types of books. The first one is how to use acrylic, like Acrylic Bible that walks you through the very first step to an entire process. And the second book is more inspirational project ideas. This one is 50 abstract painting ideas, but there are so many other types of project-oriented books that really talk you through step by step how to create one painting, and then there's multiple project like that and a lot of inspiration. The second bundle I've put together is watercolor. I would say the difference between acrylic and watercolor is when you look at it, acrylic is very opaque and it looks like a painting that you would be used to, but watercolor has a lot of transparencies and it's done on paper and not on canvas. People that love traditional painting would be more attracted to acrylic, or abstract painting, like big expressive types of paintings would be more attracted to acrylics. Someone that would be more interested in illustration, really beautiful renderings, might be more interested in watercolor. It really depends on the personality. The advantages of watercolor is that it's more portable, easier to clean up, and it takes up less space. So there's no canvases. The brushes are often smaller. The tubes are smaller. So you can get a little set in a small pencil case, fit everything into that with a sketchbook, and you've got your watercolor set that you can bring anywhere, and it's easier to wash as well. The look is very different though, so not one or the other is better. It's really depending on the person you're giving it to. When it comes to paint, there's 2 types of watercolor paints. They do the same thing, it's just that they come in a different format. So one route you can go is to buy a beginner set and pans that are dry, and you activate it with a bit of water and the brush. That's very portable. That's probably the most affordable option for a beginner. There's good beginner sets that come in hard pans like that. Very often those sets come with a travel brush included, where you can fill it up with water and it disperses water as you're painting, which is a good option. The other type of watercolor paint comes in tubes, so smaller tubes than acrylic, pretty much the same price though. And you just use a little dot at a time, because when it comes to watercolor, it's very diluted with water, so you need just the smallest dot and you're good to paint a larger area. You can get the primary colors as well, red, blue, and yellow. As a replacement to black, when it comes to watercolor, I would recommend Payne's Gray, because it looks very black when it's saturated, but when you dilute it, it's a very dark gray that has the tiniest bluish tint to it, and it's very good to mix with other colors, and it creates like a rich dark color. So that would be my recommendation instead of black for watercolor. And when it comes to white, you don't need a huge tube of white, and very often instead of watercolor white, people use white gouache because it's a little bit more opaque than watercolor. I personally find that watercolor is a little bit more tricky to mix together, and I personally like to have more colors than just the primaries. It's easier, in my opinion, to get a specific color that you want in acrylic when mixing the primaries as opposed to watercolor. So you can throw in a green, a brown, orange, purple, whatever you can get your hands on. That would be a good idea. Not necessary, but it's a good idea. When it comes to brushes, there's 2 types, like I mentioned. The travel one, where you can unscrew, fill it up with water. It's a good option. And there's the traditional brushes. I would recommend 3 again. A larger one to do to blend the colors and do backgrounds, flat, large. And then 2 pointy ones, a mid-size pointy one with a really nice point, and a detailed one. Again, go to the watercolor brush section. Very often they're shorter than acrylic paint brushes, and it'll be good. And the surface to paint on is paper, as I mentioned. Watercolor paper can be very, very expensive, but I don't think that as a beginner you need a very expensive watercolor pad. I think like an affordable starter watercolor pad does the job. I like Strathmore and I like Canson. Those are two brands that are very affordable and they're pretty solid. So if you can get your hands on one of those, it's a good purchase. As for books, for inspiration, again, there's a step-by-step beginner guide. Sometimes they have beginner guides that are specifically towards one subject, like florals or portraits, trees, or landscapes, things like that. That's a good option. And another type of book that I would recommend would be something that is not as technical, where a beginner could start playing around with color and get a result that is interesting, and that way it keeps us motivated to keep going in more complicated techniques. I like this book called Painting Yourself Calm. It talks about not stressing out about making things look a certain way, keeping the painting very expressive, sometimes abstract, and focusing more on the experience of enjoying the process and playing with colors and composition. I find that it's a good approach to keep you interested as a beginner. If you notice, for watercolor, I didn't suggest a palette. What I use is just a regular white ceramic plate that I bought at the dollar store with the tubes of paint. And if you buy the kit with the pans, then you don't need a palette. The third bundle that I have is halfway between painting and drawing. It's kind of like both in one, and it's oil pastels. So there's two types of pastels. There's the chalky one that is more powdery. I feel like those are a little bit harder to use as beginners, for me personally. Oil pastels is more like a fancy, super pigmented crayon. It feels like drawing when you use it, but it's also painterly because it involves blending. And once you're done with it, it kind of looks like a thick, like expressive acrylic painting in a way. Depending on who you're gifting this to, if it's a younger artist, maybe oil pastel would be a good option because it's very, very, very affordable and it doesn't require a lot of material. It's also portable, doesn't require water or anything like that. So it's a good option for younger artists. I use oil pastels in my painting, so it's not just for younger artists. Oil pastel sets are very affordable. Sometimes you can get a set for $5 or less than $10. I like this beginner one. It's the junior set by Craypass. You have sometimes a little set of 12. I think 25 colors is a good midpoint, and there's also sets of 50 or whatever, but they're so affordable that whatever you can get your hands on will probably do the job. Blending stumps are very useful when painting in oil pastels because you need to blend the colors together, and they're not as easy to blend as paint because it's like an oily crayon, like the pigment sticks on the paper. So blending stumps really facilitate the blending process. And the way you clean up the blending stumps, because they get dirty as you blend, is to rub them on a little bit of sandpaper. So you can get regular sandpaper or this fancy little sandpaper tablet. That's not expensive as well. It's not necessary, but it's nice to have as a gift. One thing that I don't like about oil pastels is that as you're painting, it creates a bunch of crumbs, like little speckles a little bit everywhere. So having a kneadable eraser, those malleable eraser that you can use to pick up those crumbs, because if you try to wipe them away, it smears on your drawing. So it's hard, you can't really blow on them that much either because they're sticky. So picking them up with a kneadable eraser is the best way to keep your drawing clean. And it, again, super inexpensive. It's like $1. Very useful. The ideal type of paper to use for oil pastel is mixed media paper. Mixed media paper is really good because it's not too smooth, where the oil pastel wouldn't stick to the paper, but it's not too textured because you need to be able to blend it without seeing the grain of the paper. So it's a good in between, and usually mixed media paper is thick enough. Anything 100 pounds or more will do the job. It has to be thick enough because there's a lot of rubbing involved. A sketchbook 9x12 of mixed media paper, I like Canson, but there's many other ones, will do the job perfectly. And if you want to get fancy, you can get a pointy tool to create texture, because you can kind of carve into your oil pastel drawing to mimic fur, sometimes hair, feathers, and different textures to give more dimensions to the painting. And of course there's Fixative. It's kind of like a varnish specifically made for oil pastel. I like this one by Sennelier. The downside about oil pastel is that it doesn't fully dry. It keeps a little tacky. So if you don't want it to transfer on other things or get smeared, having a fixative really helps. But if you don't get a fixative, you can tell the beginner artist that using wax paper in between the drawing when you store them does the job of protecting the drawing. So fixative is recommended, but wax paper works as well. And as for books, there's the step-by-step guides for beginners showing you the process of a drawing. Another type of book that I would recommend would be focused on a specific artist. I chose this one by Van Gogh because the painting style of Van Gogh lends itself really well to oil pastel. Any of the impressionistic movement will really work, like Matisse, Derain, Seurat, Monet. All of them are very inspiring for oil pastel drawings. If you want more art gift ideas, go watch this one. There's good ideas in there. You can also recommend my channel to the person you're giving the gift to. I'm sure we could have a lot of fun creating together. I'll see you in just a few days for another one. Thanks for watching. Bye.